Welcome to Tax Problems Explained from the perspective of an attorney, a CPA, and a former IRS agent.
Welcome to Tax Problems Explained from the perspective of an attorney, a CPA, and a former IRS agent with Lawrence T. Ullmann. With decades of experience inside the IRS and in private practice, Lawrence helps individuals and businesses understand how the tax system really works and how to resolve serious tax issues. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today we're talking about what happens when tax returns go unfiled for multiple years and how to begin getting back into compliance. Hello, Lawrence.
Hi, Leanne.
It's great to see you. Lawrence, how common is it for someone to fall behind on filing tax returns for multiple years? And what situations tend to lead to that?
Actually, it's more common than you might think, and it's not that the taxpayer is trying to evade taxes. It's normally because of some life-changing event, something of that nature, a divorce, maybe a death in the family. And what happens is, for one reason or another, the first return doesn't get filed.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is it's a spiral starts. And the next year, the taxpayer is worried, geez, I wonder what's going to happen because I didn't file last year. And the next thing you know, that return doesn't get filed. And it just keeps spiraling. Uh, so it's normally, events like that that the taxpayer winds up uh, getting behind and then becomes so afraid, doesn't want to deal with the problem, and it just gets worse and worse.
So, from the IRS's perspective, what happens when returns are not filed at all?
When returns are unfiled, the taxpayer is considered to be non-compliant, and there are various things that the IRS can and will do. Send out notices, for example, saying, we don't have a return from you. Please explain, and things of that nature. Uh, but as I said, without the returns being filed, the taxpayer is non-compliant and the statute of limitations on the returns doesn't begin.
So, at what point, does it happen right away, the very first time that a return goes unfiled?
Not necessarily. It depends on what information the IRS has in its computers, as well as workload. If the IRS doesn't have as many people to work, uh, uh, non-compliant taxpayers, that could slow things up. Uh, so it could be uh, a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, but sooner or later, the IRS will catch up and say, "Hey, we don't have returns," and, start dealing with the problem.
So, then at that point, how does the IRS determine what somebody owes if they haven't filed their returns?
Well, if the taxpayer doesn't file returns, there's what's called a substitute for return program, and the IRS will prepare a substitute for return. They'll look in their computers. They'll look at W-2s, 1099s, various other documents that are in there and reconstruct, based on that information, the taxpayer's income. Now, the problem is they're not going to know, nor are they going to be interested in trying to figure out the taxpayer's filing status. Can he file a joint return versus single? It's not, they're not going to figure out deductions, things of that nature. They're going to prepare a return basically based on that income and assess it. And almost invariably, that assessment is going to be for a lot more tax than would normally happen if a return was prepared.
Basically, to the IRS's advantage more so than the taxpayer's advantage, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Okay. So, in that case, what risks or consequences can build over time when the returns remain unfiled for several years?
Well, first of all, the statute of limitation until a return is filed, it doesn't start. Normally, there's a 10-year statute of limitation for collection and a 3-year for making changes to the tax return itself. None of that begins. Secondly, if the taxpayer would normally be getting a refund because of withholding, and more than 3 years go by, the taxpayer will lose the ability to get that refund. Third, um, and a lot of people don't really think about this, not filing a tax return is a criminal offense.
Mm.
Now, the IRS normally will not criminally go after a taxpayer, but unless there's reasons, but it could happen. And the more years that go by without filing, the more probable it could become that the taxpayer will be charged with criminal failure to file tax returns. So it just gets worse, worse, worse as time goes on.
So we're talking here about people uh, filing individual tax returns. Does the same apply to quarterly taxes that somebody might need to pay? Do those also accrue?
Yes, they can create the same kind of problems by quarterly. I don't know if you're referring to like payroll tax returns, things of that nature. Um, but definitely not filing these returns uh, can create the same kind of problems I mentioned. And another particular problem that you can run into by not filing tax returns uh, timely is there's a failure to file penalty of 5% per month and a failure to pay of 5% that can uh, uh, they max out at 25% normally, but it can add a great deal to the tax delinquency amount. Plus, there's interest that's accruing.
Mm, indeed. I think what I was thinking of is the estimated quarterly taxes that some people file. That's what I was thinking about with the quarterly. So, for somebody who wants to get back into compliance, how far back do they typically need to go when filing prior year returns?
The Internal Revenue Service has a policy statement that normally they're looking for the most recent 6 years. So let me give you an example. Assume you have 8 years of tax returns you haven't filed. The IRS is really only interested in the most recent 6. However, in California, for example, uh, they don't have a 6-year rule. So when a preparer prepares tax returns or the taxpayer does it himself or herself, they'll go back the whole 8 years because in order to prepare the California tax returns, you need to have first the federal return prepared so that the California piggybacks on that. And what people will do if they don't know better, or preparers for that matter, they'll file all 8 years with the Internal Revenue Service and all 8 years with the Franchise Tax Board. What a knowledgeable attorney like myself would do is I would only send in and file the 6 years for the IRS and then all 8 years for the uh, Franchise Tax Board, California Franchise Tax Board. If the preparer or the attorney or who's ever representing the taxpayer doesn't understand this and sends in all 8 years to the IRS, all 8 years are going to be assessed, and the taxpayer will have to pay completely because once the return is filed, it's too late. The assessment takes place and the delinquency penalties and everything accrue. So you have to be very careful.
Wow, that's a good reason to consult with somebody before you just jump in and do it yourself. Can you walk us through a general example of someone who had several years of unfiled returns and explain how they were able to get back into compliance? Did it just all happen right away or did it take some time?
Now it can take some time. Again, if if the tax returns have not been filed and the IRS prepares substitutes for returns, what will happen is when the taxpayer prepares returns and files them, normally they will replace the substitute for return, and hopefully, therefore, the tax will be less because, again, the substitute return normally doesn't have deductions, things of that nature, and as a result, the deficiency is normally larger. If returns haven't been prepared by the IRS as substitute for returns, then what I do if I'm representing the taxpayer is I will send the returns in at one time, but each return will be put into a separate envelope, and then those envelopes will be put into a larger envelope. The reason is it's easy for the IRS Service Center not to realize that there are 6 returns, let's say, or 5 or 4 that are being prepared by having a separate return in each envelope, and then collectively inside one large envelope, you can avoid the problem of that I just alluded to.
Wow, fascinating. Again, these nuanced things that the average person just wouldn't know. That's incredible. What challenges tend to come up when reconstructing income, expenses, or records when you might be talking about many years?
Well, if you when you have to reconstruct, obviously, you may not be able to get all the documents you had. You could have lost documents. Banks only keep, at least here in California, banks only keep banking records going back 7 years.
Mm.
If you need to go back further, uh, you're not gonna be able to get those records if you don't, already have them. Plus, memories start to fade. It's very difficult to remember what you did 5 years ago, 4 years ago, what kind of expenses you had, etcetera. So, the longer you wait, obviously, the reconstruction becomes more difficult.
Well, as we conclude today, when somebody is dealing with multiple unfiled returns, when does it make sense to involve a tax attorney rather than trying to handle it alone?
Certainly, if you're dealing with multiple years, for a couple of reasons. Multiple years have their own problems, in general, plus multiple years can give rise to, the Internal Revenue Service going after the taxpayer criminally. Uh, Secondly, if the taxpayer doesn't want to speak directly with the IRS because he or she doesn't know what to say or is afraid they may say something that can create more problems, uh, by having an attorney who has a attorney-client privilege, the IRS can only talk to that attorney, and the privilege protects any confidential information that the taxpayer gave to the attorney. Uh, Also, as I mentioned earlier in this conversation, things like the 6-year rule, most people are not gonna understand or know about. There are many other rules. I mean, we don't have the time to go into all of the potential problems that can result when you're trying to get back, uh, uh, into compliance with the IRS, but there's definitely a myriad of them, and it normally pays to get someone who is knowledgeable, and if it's an attorney, someone that has that attorney-client privilege, that can protect the, taxpayer.
Well, as always, Lawrence, this is fascinating and important information that you've shared today. And that is it for today's episode of Tax Problems Explained from the perspective of an attorney, a CPA, and a former IRS agent. If you have unfiled tax returns and want to understand your options for getting back into compliance, you can visit lawrencetallman.com. Thanks for listening and be sure to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you catch every episode. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Leanne. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.